I'm Chris Terranova, and this is the Generational Exchange. 4 generations, 1 conversation. The business world is a tapestry woven from different threads. The experience of seasoned veterans, the tech-savvy energy of the younger generation, and everything in between. In this podcast, we'll unravel those threads, explore the unique perspectives from panelists in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s on today's business challenges. By bringing together these unique voices, we hope to spark new ideas, bridge the generation gap, and equip listeners with a well-rounded approach to navigating the ever-evolving business landscape. All right, this is episode 8 already. Hard to believe. I'm going to welcome back our panel. Welcome back, panel.
Hello.
Hello.
Starting, let's see, I'm going to go on my screen today. And if you're listening to the podcast, we do have a video feature too. It's always a lot of fun to watch us because we're all really good looking. But make sure you go to YouTube and look up the Generational Exchange. You can see us talking live. But starting at the top of my screen, I have Mark Russell, who represents the 60s generation, or I guess we said this last time, your 60s, I guess. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you, Chris?
Good. I'll figure out
be
how to
here.
say that at some point, right? Maybe at like episode 50, I'll get the patter down. Next on my screen, I have Rhett Suchu. Good evening, sir, who's representing our 30s. How are you tonight?
Hello, sir. Doing well. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. We also have Jeremy Davidson, who is representing the people in their 40s. Hello, my friend.
Howdy, howdy.
And I'm Chris Terranova. I am representing people in their 50s. All right. So if you have listened to our podcast before, you know that we always pick a timely business topic and talk to you about tips and tricks to get through. And we do it from each of our different perspectives. Our episode today is about looking for your next great adventure. Are you facing a job search with more rejection letters than interview requests? Are you feeling lost and wondering how to land that perfect next role? You're certainly not alone. Today, we're talking about how to stay positive and productive during your job search, whether you've been impacted by a layoff or you've decided to move on. Certainly in this panel, we've all been there, navigating the sometimes confusing waters of the job hunt. Keep in mind that feeling discouraged is natural, but it doesn't have to stop you from landing your dream job. We'll be sharing our top tips today for staying afloat during your search with specific strategies for those actively employed and for those currently in between positions. So with that, let's start the exchange.
This is such an interesting topic, right? Especially as we've gone through the job search function as of late. It's been a topic of conversation, of mentoring, of propping each other up. We were talking about that earlier today. I did this on the last episode. I tossed out the elephant in the room, so I'm going to do it again. I'll get a t-shirt made. The elephant in the room here might be, these are general tips that we found that can lead to some success or at least help lighten the burden as you're going through a job search. There are so many people out there, especially in today's job market, that have been looking for months upon months upon months, if not years, right? Some of the folks that we were volunteering with, helping with resumes and interview skills, it's an incredibly difficult job market right now. So I thought I'd caveat that with, their tips and tricks that we found to be successful as we were navigating some of our own search activities in the recent past here. But may or may not apply to your particular situation.
I think that's a fair point. And, again, we always come at this from our perspective. Up until very recently, Jeremy, you were looking, I was looking, Mark's looking, Rhett's employed, but he has been looking in the past. We also know that when we talk in these generalities, your financial circumstances may not permit you to do all of these things, or, they don't fit everybody for every reason. Keep this in mind as a general guide, right? And hopefully there's something through this. It doesn't mean you have to do everything that we say, but keep it in mind. There may be some things in here that will help you in ways that you may not have expected. This isn't just about fine-tuning your resume. This is really more the soft skills around that, right? So hopefully that gives you something to look towards. And again, to Jeremy's point, everybody's situation is different. But with that, let's talk about this, right? We came up with the 6 top things to do to remain positive and active during a job search when you're not working. When you've transitioned out of a role, I left my role, others have been riffed over time. It's a different dynamic when you're not working and you're looking, right? So we wanted to give you some tips on how to make sure you're kind of getting through this, because from where you are to where you're going can be a slog. It can be, right? So the first thing that we came up with is structure your day. Treat your job search like a full-time job. Set specific hours for application prep, for networking and interview prep. Have a routine to keep you focused and energized. I have to say, as someone who, took a bit of a sabbatical and then started actively looking a few months ago, when I built that routine, and I give full credit to my friend Jeremy Davidson, who had created a spreadsheet and was really focused on this. And Jeremy, I'll let you speak to it. But I hadn't necessarily thought of it that way. I hadn't really been in a place where I had gone kind of from role to role for a long time. And being out of the game for a while, being out of the market, it was intimidating. And it felt like I was using the shotgun approach. And kind of structuring it and focusing really helped me. Keep track of what I was doing, and it gave me something to look towards every day without it consuming my entire day. Jeremy, I'm going to throw this at you first because I know you did this a lot, and then I'll turn it to the others.
I think this is the one the one thing that I did really well. As painful as the layoff was, and I'm incredibly fortunate to have a very supportive infrastructure, right? I was able to sit down with the missus and say, hey, I need to still go to the office, and I'll put that in air quotes if you're watching on YouTube, but I need to go to the office every day. I know what the market looks like, and this is going to be my job. Got more flexibility maybe than a normal 8 to 5 job, but that's the one thing I think I did really well is every day at some point, between 9 and 5, I was out. And I probably took it to the extreme, Chris. I think I ended up incorporating feedback from you back into that. Like, hey, you can't do it for 8 hours a day. You're gonna burn yourself out. And I think Mark has some touch points on that. But I will say, I think that was probably the contributing factor to the success. Ultimately with the search was that it was just every single day. It was an exercise over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's right. Mark, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, to Jeremy's point, this is a full-time job, especially when you're in between jobs. So you've got to look at it as, again, that full day, but you can't, so you've got to balance it, right? You got to do your exercise. You've got to spend at least 4 hours doing a combination of the job search, the company search. You have to customize your cover letter. You have to really, in some cases, customize your resume. If I'm looking for a sales position, I'm going to be sales heavy. If I'm looking for a customer success position, I'm going to really accentuate those customer success experiences that I've had. And especially now, over the last 5-7 years, we have this whole thing called AI that is doing that resume scrubbing. So things are different. You've got to look at what are the key words in the job description and make sure you're inserting those into your resume as well, or else you're never going to get past the AI engine.
That's a good point. And there's also, AI tools that can help you with that. And we're going to talk about that more in a later episode, but, use some of those tools to your advantage. Go ahead, Jeremy. I jumped in there for you, man.
No, I was just going to ask off the cuff, how many active versions of a resume did you have?
I know I have 7 that were general, and then I probably had another 15 or 20 that were customized to specific roles. I had to create a folder on my computer, and I always had latest resume as one of the folders within the folder because I would have so many versions, I would lose track of which one that I was using. So it was an ever evolving thing as I found keywords and I found I forgot that skill or I changed it, right? So it was a constant change. How about you?
Oh, same. I mean, and you get advice from all 4 corners of the web, right? So I've got a 1-pager because, oh gosh, you shouldn't have a resume longer than 1 page. And I've got a 4-pager because that one was super pretty and I love that one, but it's too long. And I've got all the customized ones in between, right? That help feed into that ATS engine. And I don't know at the end of the day. We may be able to touch on this today, but at the end of the day, there's going to be that perfect match. There's that partner out there waiting for you, and it just needs to be that one partner, right? And that resume, that cover letter, your work history, your personality, it's going to connect with that person. And you got four people on the podcast here that are rooting you on that happens sooner than later, but it will happen.
And reach out to us. If you're feeling stuck, send us a note. There was a job that I reposted on LinkedIn that I must have gotten 30 or 40 people that acknowledged it. And I responded to them and just said, just kind of hang in there. And you could see that the responses I got back were very positive. So reach out to us if you're feeling like you need a little positive boost. We'll all reach out to you. Which ties in perfectly into our next point, which, gosh, it was like we planned it. Actively network, right? Reach out to former colleagues, friends in your field, industry professionals on LinkedIn. You can even attend webinars or industry events to build connections. Again, when we started the podcast, I connected with an old friend of mine that I hadn't talked to in probably 7 or 8 years, and we reconnected. And it wasn't necessarily that he could find me a job, but he led me to some different groups and some things that I hadn't thought of. It isn't always comfortable to be vulnerable and say, I don't have a job, but I'm looking. Doesn't mean you have to go hat in hand, but make sure you're connecting. Mark, I'm going to start with you on this one. I know you have a lot of experience with this.
Right. Well, and again, this should be an ongoing exercise that you do regardless. It's difficult because I'm personally guilty of when I would start a new role, I was heads down and I did very little other than maybe scrolling through LinkedIn. But a stretch goal is to say, can I reach out and connect with just 2 people? And even if it's just connecting in through LinkedIn Messenger or saying, hey, do you have time for a 10-minute phone call on a late Friday afternoon or a early Thursday morning? It's a great way just to make sure, because there's nothing worse than to turn around and say, now I'm out of a job and I almost feel like I'm asking people to look for me or keep me in mind. So again, if you're keeping that network going, those are things. And again, I think it's now more commonplace to say, is there anything I can do for you? What can I do to help you from that perspective? So again, that's how I'm trying to use my networking all the time, because I am running my own business now as well. So, it's always keeping in those conversations.
Partner with brg.com. Okay. Red, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I agree with everything Mark said. I'd probably say the one other thing you could potentially do, right, is like how many of hundreds of phone contacts do you think you have in your phone, and people that you've just forgotten that you met one time or something at an event or something, right? It may be worth scrolling through there and seeing, who's that person that I met in that college course sometime or whatever. And then you go and look at their LinkedIn profile and they're in sales and you're in sales and you just happen to find a connection. Sometimes getting in the door and through those AI kind of scanners, right, can be the biggest battle. So I'd say if you're really just kind of stuck, like, but I don't have a network. Well, you probably talk to people, I would assume. Try looking through your contacts and maybe just looking them up. See if they have anything in common with you professionally, and then just reach out.
Oh, it's a good point. And we're talking about LinkedIn because it's something that we're familiar with, but there's, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram. There's so many ways to connect with people, and keeping those connections and utilizing them. You'd be surprised at how many people you know. Jeremy, any thoughts on this one?
Heck yeah, I want in on this one. I'll be quiet for the next couple if I overtalk. This one gets me really pumped up. And it feeds into the last one. So I hit the ground running. I'm spending 8 hours a day kicking out resumes and cover letters, and I'm going cross-eyed, and I start to feel that burnout, right? And this one saved me. So I think I don't know if we've talked about it on previous podcasts, but I put a note out there on LinkedIn and I said, hey, is there anybody out there that needs some help with the resume? Needs some help with interviewing skills? I'll carve out time of the day. We can sit down. I'll be the director of sales. I'll be the director of marketing. I'll be whichever hiring manager you want me to be. So I can put on those hats, right? I mean, I've sat in the leadership room with them, and I know what they're generally looking for, and whether or not a candidate can articulate their value proposition effectively on an interview call. And oh my gosh, it was so much fun. I had probably 3 dozen people reach out to me on the interviewing one, probably times two that on folks looking for some help with their resume or just some general feedback. It was mostly in the customer success area, but it broke up my day. It was no all of a sudden it wasn't 8 hours of just, oh, I got to tailor the keywords on my resume for this one again. I just did that. It was interacting, it was talking with folks, it was hearing their stories. And it wasn't completely altruistic. Right now, sitting in the head of CX chair of my new position, I've got a network of folks that I've talked to that I know can do X, Y, and Z, should an opportunity pop up. And I can vouch for them when I see openings on LinkedIn, right? Like, hey, I talked to Marcellus, and he was phenomenal. He'd be perfect for this role.
Right.
I feel a little bit more comfortable putting myself out there and recommending folks because I've talked to them. But the other plug I'll put in there is professional groups. If you've got a PMP affiliation, for those project managers out there that might be watching, go to your local chapter. We found an awesome one as of late. Thomas Knoll started up a group called Self-Healing Leaders, and I joined that. And I recently landed a job. I don't really need to network anymore, but I'll tell you what, my lesson learned here was keep those networks alive and active, right? Mark, I think you touched on that. We're not going to let that slide. And I love the idea of continuing to build out and cultivate those mentoring type relationships of folks that you can talk to and that you can network with. And, you guys obviously will remain my core three from here to kingdom come. But, there's some value out there that others could potentially bring to the table, right?
I think the reason we are still connected is because we did do that care and feeding of the relationships in between when we didn't work together, because there were pockets of time, that we didn't work together, but that was part of our network expansion. You met, I'll give a shout out to my buddy Clint. You met my buddy Clint because you guys connected because we were talking about it, right? And that started a whole conversation, and you guys got some good feedback. So there's all kinds of things like that you can do. Rhett, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I didn't want to cut you off on that as well.
No, I think you guys hit all the points there.
Okay.
So I'll just add one more. Go to your
please, Mark.
alumni association, either in your undergrad or graduate.
Good one.
Because I know for our alumni association, one of our 3 core goals this year was to really help professional community. So we're spotlighting alumni every month. We're spotlighting your networking events, because you never know, even if you're not looking today, you may be looking tomorrow, or especially with, no disrespect, but for Gen Z and Gen X, you can change careers 3 or 4 times in 25, 30 years, and no one's going to blink an eye anymore about that.
Right.
Versus back in my day, quote, if I was in technology sales, which I was, I couldn't even get a sniff in pharmaceuticals because I didn't have that pharmaceutical experience. So I think, again, leveraging a variety of different things really is helpful.
I think that's right. And I think that kind of, again, I think these all stack, right? The next one, number 3, is to limit job search negativity, right? Avoid dwelling on rejections. If there's any feedback, analyze it, use it. A lot of times you don't get that, but you can use it to continue to improve your applications and your interview skills. And I'm going to start off on this one because, again, leveraging my network, which is actually how the impetus of this podcast started, was when I decided to first start looking, I didn't know what to do. And I was feeling kind of down about it. If I'm being honest, it was like, I feel like I have good skills. Why does, am I the ugly girl at the dance? Nobody wants to dance with me. And I can't tell you how many times I called Rhett or Mark or Jeremy, and they kind of helped me reframe the rejection. They helped me kind of keep moving forward, right? It made me, it just took away some of that feeling of being alone. So I'll open it up to any of you guys on that one, but I think that's a really important one, and it does tie back into keeping your network alive.
Yeah, Chris, I think I'd like to ask you and Jeremy a question here in particular. I think when we were talking about it early on, you had mentioned that I think you had a stat that it was something like only 6% of your jobs that you apply for, you're going to get an interview for currently in the market.
Yeah, the running rough number is for every resumes you put out, you should expect no more than 4 to 6 interviews.
Yeah.
And I can say from experience that trend's about right.
And so, I mean, from your perspective and the job searches that you both went through, I mean, how much of it was, like you're saying, putting in the keywords, trying to get past the AI or the screen or the auto screener that's going to cut you out versus I need to apply to 200 jobs today because I'm only going to get 12 interviews this week, right? Did that come up in your minds at all, or?
It was a little bit of both for me, but I think there's an upside and a downside to both of those. The upside is you might get more chances to interview. The downside is you're diluting the pool of quality jobs that you're applying for. And,
Right.
I think you then also face more rejection because the more you put yourself out there, the more rejection you're going to face. So I think there's some balance in that. And again, for me, having Jeremy kind of going through it at the same time that I was and Mark was going through it, we were able to talk about it. It kind of made you feel like you were less alone. And it kind of felt like therapy, and I felt less negative about the process. Like it isn't just me. Right. So I think, if I can use you as an example, when things changed at Amplify, because you and I were still talking, I happened to have an opportunity that kind of worked out timing wise for when you were leaving your last job, but you had kept that network alive with me.
Right.
So it kind of helped you avoid even the negative job search altogether. Right. So I think there's a lot of important stuff there. Jeremy, I'm using you as an example a lot. I don't mean to speak for you.
No, if I had to tell you, you looked pretty one more time, we both would have been banging our heads against the wall.
I think both of our wives would have been questioning things, but
No, and I don't know, Mark, if this will resonate with you. The biggest aha moment I had was switching my mind over and treating it like sales. And I've always told anybody that'll listen, I don't want to get in sales. I'm not a sales guy. Put me with the customers that we've got and I'll be your rock star. But I would crumble under a quota, and the job search to me ultimately felt like a quota. I've got to get that one, right? I got to nail that one big opportunity. And shifting your thought process to sales is a numbers game, right? The 100 people you contact, 5 might want a presentation, and 2 might want a quote, and maybe you'll close that one. And focusing on the value proposition, right? So kind of that full circle of sales, right? And you're the product. So what's your value proposition?
Right.
And to me, that was kind of the focus shift going through this process was, okay, what do I have to offer? What's the company that has the need where I would be the best product fit for?
Right.
And that kind of helped me reframe things in terms of all those different opportunities out there that you could do, but where's the need? Where would they look at you and go, oh my gosh, you're perfect, you're pretty, grab
Right.
you and pull you in. So I don't know. That's kind of my take on that.
no,
Yeah.
and that's perfect if I may, because that's our next point, right? So again, it's like we planned this. Reframe your thinking, right? Use this as an opportunity for professional development or personal growth. Look at this as almost like a game. The way you're saying that, Jeremy, you kind of gamified it a little bit, right? You might get some new skills out of this. You're certainly going to get a fresh perspective. But I think that whole reframing your thinking is really important because you have to switch gears. You have to look at it differently. Mark, I'll start with you on this one. I mean, you and I have talked about this. You actually helped me with that a few times as I was going through this, right? Can you speak a little bit more to that one?
Yeah, well, I think there's, really 3 points. Number one, always demonstrate gratitude and highlight gratitude. So one of the things I've done for my network this month, is, and I got this from Eric Wood, a former NFL center for the Buffalo Bills, is he challenged on one of the other podcasts that I love listening to, write down 3 wins every day during the month of May. or it could be any month, right? But just what are those 3 wins? They could be personal, they could be professional. And from that perspective, that's going to help. The reframing, and to Jeremy's point, some of it is, a sales game, yet if you're very precise in what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to find, that is so much better than the spray and pray. Or I heard the other day, from a recruiter, they talked about how they advise their clients against post and pray. So really try and make it selective. So again, if you can reframe where you are, and plus always look at it as whatever experience I'm going through today is going to give me an experience that maybe someone a year from now or 2 years from now, I may be able to pay it forward and help them through it.
I think it's a great point. And, for me, I had an experience with a job search recently where I went through 4 months of interviews, probably 20 hours, all for them to decide not to hire anyone at all. And I had to switch it from, kind of what the hell to, okay, that was an opportunity for me. I got to practice my interview skills, right? Because I really hadn't interviewed for a job in 15 years, essentially. I got to rethink how to do that. I got to put presentations together. I looked at it as a learning opportunity rather than a waste of time because it was frustrating. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't frustrating. What's that Broadway show? I love you. You're perfect. Now change. It felt a little bit like that. Like, you're everything we needed, but we decided we don't want you. And I had to get past that a little bit, right? But I did learn something in the process, but I did have to reframe how I approached it. Red, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
No, I think you guys.
You're out. I'm out. All right. No, but so Mark, you touched on this briefly. It leads into our next point, right? Which is practice gratitude and focus on self-improvement. I think one of the things that my wife got me was she got me a gratitude journal, which I am not a journaler. It's just not, I'm a very logical Rubik's Cube kind of thinker. But even just getting up every morning and trying to think of that one thing, you just had to write down one thing that you were grateful for, right? And you focus on that a little bit, whether it's you've got kids or a dog or whatever it is, the sun is shining, you're not just focused on that job search. Is there an online course you can take to do some self-improvement? Are there new skills you can pick up? Again, going back to LinkedIn, there's a whole section called free online courses that you can take, and you can even get certificates. They don't cost anything, right? So looking at that, practicing gratitude, focusing on self-improvement, right? That can really help you. Red, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think to that point, with all of this, and Mark mentioned it earlier, we now have the potential to possibly switch what job market you're in, right? So losing your job is a huge hit, emotionally, financially, physically, emotionally, right? It impacts you in so many different ways, but it can also be an opportunity to reflect on what you have been doing, right? Let's say you've been in the same industry for 15 years. And for the last 5 of it, it's just been a dog. Like you have not enjoyed it. You really struggled with it. Maybe this is a time to look at, is there someplace else I can utilize all the skills that I've learned and gained? Like you said, is there a course, a quick pickup course that I can do? I have so many friends who pivoted from roles and went into coding, for example, and there's like a 6-month boot camp program that you can go in, right? And as long as you've prepared financially to be okay for that long, right? Maybe you do some part-time gigs or something on the side to be able to afford it. Like it's changed their lives. And so I would say another potential avenue here is think of the opportunity to really improve from where you were even at or changing.
It's a great point. Jeremy, any thoughts on that one?
No, I like that, and I kind of chuckled because during that job search period, I started an S corp. Chris,
Right.
what'd you start, like 4 businesses?
I started a couple. I did start a couple. And that's very low cost, right? But it gave me something to focus on besides just the grind of, either silence or rejection letters or finding those jobs, right? It did give us something else. It did give me something else to do, and I learned some skills along the way. And we started this podcast, right? And I had to learn how to edit. And listen, for those of you who are watching, it's probably not the highest quality, but I'm learning, right? It's a learning process. We had to learn how to post podcasts and look at analytics and how do we get people to pay attention. And, and thank you to everybody who listens, because our viewership grows every week and our listenership grows. But it gave me something else to do, and I learned a new skill that I can transfer to another job, right? So I think there is opportunity there. Like Jeremy said, instead of just sitting in front of the computer 8 hours grinding, find some other things that you can do to focus on that you can find some grace and gratitude. Okay, let's move on to our last point before we move on to what to do when you do have a role and you're looking. This is an interesting one, and I can speak again to this one from experience, is take a lower skill role while you're looking, right? While you search for that dream job or replacement one, a lower skill position could provide you some financial stability, can keep your skills sharp, give you something else to focus on while you're looking. And again, I'm going to use myself as an example. This was a long time ago, right? But I had 2 kids and a wife, and I owned my own business, and I kind of was given the choice of owning my business or having a family. So I chose having a family. But what was I going to do in the meantime? And I had to go look for a new career. And it took a little time. In between, I ended up working at Eddie Bauer at the mall, folding t-shirts. And I did that like 20 hours a week. The money was not going to make or break us in a way, but I felt like I was doing something that brought some income into the family. I was contributing. I met some new people. Didn't necessarily put it on my resume, hey, expert t-shirt folder, but it gave me something that I could go to every day. I got in my car and got out of my house and went to this job. And there was no shame in that. I saw people that were neighbors and friends, and I decided to fold t-shirts, right? I don't give a damn what anybody thinks. Don't be afraid. Don't let your ego get in the way of, either finding a way to supplement your income, or, give yourself something to do if you're in a financial position where you can. It's more the doing, I'll open it up to the panel if anybody has any thoughts on that one.
No, I think it's probably important to call it, if you're listening and you've not found yourself in a layoff situation or a termination situation, where you're looking and you don't currently have a job, unemployment doesn't pay a lot, even if you're eligible for it. Be prepared. Hopefully folks are seeing the current job market, and even if you feel relatively secure in your current role, hopefully you're preparing a little bit of a nest egg or a little bit of a safety net there. But that's hard. Gosh, groceries are up 25%, gas is up 25%, rent's up 35%. It's super hard. And Chris, I loved your sentiment. I can't echo it enough. There's no shame. I had a mark on my calendar where I was going to go march my butt up to Cabela's because I love Cabela's, so why not work there? If I didn't find a job by then, I was going up there. There's no shame in that, right? Whether you have a family, whether you're single, whether you're supporting folks, whether you're not, there's no shame in rolling up your sleeves and doing something. Maybe it's not a VP job, but it's a job, right? And I think the other aspect of that you were trying to get at is there's a mental health element to, you're getting up, you're showering, you look nice, you go to a place, you earn a paycheck, and you come home. That might be enough to lift somebody's spirits that's struggling. I've been looking for a job for 9 months or 12 months, whatever the story is. Maybe that little exercise every day or every other day is enough to lift that person's spirit enough to keep them going on that job search to find that, that one perfect one that's sitting out there for them.
Right.
That's a great point.
Mark, Brett? Well, I was going to say, building off of that, and Jeremy alluded to this earlier, about, quote, selling yourself, right? Daniel Pink, the author, will say everyone sells. That said, also look at where are those companies that you really want to be a part of. And from a personal experience, I had a gentleman that really wanted to work for our company. And he convinced me, and and at the end it was like, I am sorry, you were just like 2 or 3 levels above this entry level associate account executive role. But he convinced me that no, I want to be part of not only your company, but especially your team, having gone through the interview process. And so from that perspective, it was one of the best hires I made, even though all my hires are like my children. I love them all equally, but this was truly a lesson in perseverance and really selling themselves as to why they wanted to be, part of that.
It's a great example. And again, I just read an article and I wish I had found it for the show, about how there's nothing wrong with taking a step back. And sometimes taking a step back can be really liberating. We've all had to do that in our careers. It isn't always just forward progression. A lot of times, if you look back at your life, everything is a zigzag, right? One of my favorite movies is the movie Parenthood with Steve Martin. It spoke to me even before I had a family. I just love that movie. But there's a scene where they've had a really dramatic issue, and the grandma's just sitting at the table, and she said, life is like a roller coaster. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Some people like the merry-go-round. It just goes round and around. There's nothing there. I'll stick with the roller coaster because you get something out of it. And that always stuck with me. Just like life, sometimes working is a roller coaster, and you've got to be okay with sometimes going down to go back up, and that up may be even higher than you expected, right? So don't be afraid of that. All right, any other thoughts on that before we move on to what to do when you are looking and you have a job?
Only other thing I'd probably add to that is working for a company potentially gives you an opportunity to apply for roles that are higher up and such. There are companies that have different protocols for internal employees applying versus external, right? And so it could even be a foot in the door if you do end up looking at that company. Just as an aside.
A great point. Once you get in, there's other opportunities. I actually have a dear friend of mine that had been out of work. He was, again, vulnerable and willing to take a entry-level position at our previous company. He was actually a contractor, worked at one of our departments as an hourly employee. About 3 months after he started, a position opened up on the sales enablement team. He took that job, and now I think it's going on 4 years. He's now been promoted a few times. He's now a lead. He's a senior person. He's making a very good income. He's got a 401k, but he was willing to take that risk and get his foot in the door, similar to the example that Mark gave. So great point. All right, so we've talked about some things to do when you're between roles. What do you do when you're looking for a job when you already have one, right? That sounds simple, but that can also be a bit soul crushing too if you don't do a few things to kind of keep yourself in check. So we're going to talk about the top 3 things you can do to kind of remain positive and productive while you're looking for a new job when you already have one. So
wait,
go.
There's an elephant in this room too.
Oh my gosh, so many elephants.
If you haven't taken a peek at the current job market today, don't put yourself in a position where where you start looking for a job when you're employed and you find yourself out in the job market for real. It's tough out there right now. It's an employer centric job market right now. It is not a job seeker job market. That said, if you find yourself in a toxic or an unhealthy work relationship, right, where it's impacting your mental well-being or your health, your physical well-being, by all means, you should get the heck out of that environment, right? You need to prioritize yourself. But I did want to caveat this as we look, because, who hasn't, casually looked around for positions while you're currently in one? Maybe you're ready for that manager role and there isn't one at your company. You're ready for that director role. There isn't one available, right? Hopefully you got a boss you can talk to about that. If you don't, you might have to be searching on the side, but I wanted to call out, if you haven't been paying attention to the job market lately, look at it first, because it's tough. It's a tough one right now.
And it could take some time, right?
Yes.
And you can get just as much rejection handing out a handful of resumes while you're employed, right? But if you're in a role that you're not happy with, you have to kind of follow some of these techniques, and it could take a little while, given that there, especially in the tech sector and a few places like that, there's a lot of competition. So I think keeping yourself positive and productive is important. So let's talk about that now that we've passed all of our elephants. The first one is, schedule strategic job search time, similar to what we were talking about before. Carve out some dedicated time. If you've made the decision to look for another role, whether it's within your company or more likely outside of your company, setting up that time is really crucial. Again, it can't be shotgun. It can't be half-assed, for lack of a better word. You need to block off specific hours, either in the morning or the evening, or maybe on a lunch break, where you're updating your resume, you're doing application submissions, and you're targeting your network, right? You can do this with some stealth, but having a focused approach does give you some consistency, and it ties back to what we talked about before. I'll open it up to the panel. Rhett, Mark, any thoughts on that? Jeremy?
Yeah, I'd say the most important part here, or not most important part, but as far as like when you're thinking about a job search, is why are you searching for a job search, right? Try to make sure that you're looking at, is it the culture that you don't like? Is it the pay? Sometimes, obviously, finances are a huge thing and one of the primary things, but you're probably always going to be looking to get paid more for something. So try to look at some of the other potential issues that are causing you to dislike your current position, and try to zone in on those when you're looking for new companies. Use Glassdoor and these other places where if your company culture isn't great, find the companies where their employees are like, hey, I took a pay cut to go to this company because it's amazing. Like, I love it. They're all about the goal of the company, and we, deliver education or whatever it is. So I'd say that's one of the more important things.
That's a great point. Mark, Jeremy, any more on that one?
I like
Just make sure you're doing your homework. And there's so many tools to be able to do that these days, right?
Yep.
You can always be looking in LinkedIn saying, who do I know that is already there? And then get the story behind the story, from that perspective. But you need to be committed. And it's almost as if you're taking a part-time job. You can't do it as your full-time job, but you've got to be dedicated to say, okay, how am I going to make sure I do the research? I have the updated resumes, but yet you also have to be, weary of, is someone going to say something or is someone going to see something? And that's why it was always interesting when you'd see people walk into a conference room and close the door. And it's like, it doesn't seem like they have a customer meeting on their schedule. I wonder what's going on there. So you have to use that discretion.
100%. I remember at our last company, we had these like little telephone booths, and you could literally, there were a couple of times where people were caught doing interviews because you could hear right through the wall. So, always kind of know your environment, be aware. All right, let's move on to the next one is practice interview techniques, right? Again, I'm going to use myself as an example. I hadn't interviewed in a really long time, and preparing for interview questions, prepare for those things. Again, during breaks, be cautious if you work in an office and they've got thin walls, but practice, right? Rehearse. It's silly as it sounds. Rehearse, record yourself. You really do get more comfortable with it the more you do it. And again, Mark, I know you've got some thoughts on this, but something you taught me after you came and started working with me in our last organization was I was always on video calls all day long. And apparently I always made faces. Like if I wasn't happy with something, I was always scowling or had an eyebrow. I just did it just now. I had an eyebrow raised or I would pout. And you told me to start watching myself on the screen. And I did. I would pin my picture to the screen and watch what I was doing when I wasn't talking, because if I was on a call, and we had some difficult calls during that time, I had to watch my face so that I wasn't making faces. And that really helped me for when I started doing video interviews. Was I was much more comfortable on camera. I was making fewer faces, right? I wasn't smiling so big that, my teeth were touching my ears because it looked disingenuous. Practicing is really important on that. And Mark, I'll toss it to you on that one.
Yeah. Well, we all know practice makes perfect. And, making a first impression is always very, very important. I've just joined a larger professional networking group. And in our orientation, they spoke about, make sure that you're natural in what you're saying. However, introduce yourself up front in your little 30-second, elevator pitch, and then reintroduce yourself or say who you were, because a lot of times people may not hear, especially if you're presenting to a large group, oh, what was their name again? But when you say, yes, I'm Mark Russell, I'm part of Denver 3, now all of a sudden at the end, they're jotting that down. So again, it's just, practice will make perfect, and you'll get comfortable with it. And I'll turn it over to Jeremy, because he was doing phenomenal work in this area, leading up to his new adventure now.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. I enjoy it. You know what? I think one of my most favorite activities in a leadership role is the opportunity to bring new folks onto the team, or promote from within. Brad, at some point we're gonna have to share the internal promotion process we came up with within our team when there was an opportunity available, because it was cool.
Wasn't that thing cool? Oh, it's great. I mean, it was a fair and true test, and man, by the end of that interview process, we had the best person by far for the role. It was, yeah, we should, because we built that sucker out. That was great.
Such a tease. It sounds like a future episode.
That's right. We'll bring Maddie on as a guest.
Exactly.
I had so much fun with this particular technique, and I love the idea of practicing, right? Because and maybe this is where you leverage mentors. Because we weren't practicing interviewing skills necessarily, Chris, but we had a lot of back and forth conversations about companies going into interviews. What are their needs? What are their look fors? What are they doing? And I know both of us went into a lot of those having, researched the person that we're interviewing with, their teams, the company, how well they're doing. But I think what a lot of folks, just in my time practicing with them, forget is their personality. It's really easy to kind of squeeze up and be nervous and be anticipating that next question, and the personality doesn't come through, who that person is. And at the end of the day, as a hiring manager, I'm hiring the person, not the super nervous person that's on my interview. I'm hiring that person, right? And that's who I want to meet during the interview process. So we did spend a decent amount of time, just kind of chuckling and laughing, and hey, let's relax, let's shake it out. Because if somebody asks you, what are you good at, you can talk to it. But if somebody's sitting in a suit and tie on the other side of the Zoom meeting says, tell me your strengths, you freeze up, right?
Mark can tell you.
I know that answer.
And on all of ours too.
So, I just kind of, that's the one thing I think practice will help you do, is help your personality shine through. Most people are hiring on attitude and aptitude and enthusiasm and willingness to jump in and tackle the job at hand, right? You're probably competing against a dozen or 1,000 people that have your same skill set.
Right.
They want to know who you are. And I think the practicing, whether it's a mentor, a friend, a stranger that happened to post come meet up with me. I'll
practice with me.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea.
It's a really good point. And one other thing I'm going to toss in there too, that I've had to get better at as I've been interviewing, is, especially if you're a little more seasoned like us, or some of us anyway, how do you describe your work experience? Tell me about yourself. Tell me what you did. You've got 25 years of experience. You've got a 3-page resume. How do you say that? And I got a nice compliment from somebody that I was interviewing with, because I was able to go through that whole thing in about 5 minutes, because I had practiced it. I had a lot of detail, but I was able to go through it, and kind of pick out the highlights that were relevant to that job. But you can either spend 30 seconds or 20 minutes on your history. If you can practice and get that down, you've got your elevator pitch ready to go. It really does help as you go through it. All right, last one, and then we'll wrap it up here. Maintain a positive outlook while you're at your current job. I know that can be hard. And again, we've talked about this before. That's a broad generalization. But while you're looking for your new position, it's important to stay engaged and professional at your current role, right? As Jeremy said, the market's tough out there. You have a job, like, you've got to stay with it. make sure you're still delivering that high quality work, because one, you can speak to it in your new jobs, and you're not burning any bridges at your current one, right? Keeping that positive attitude also helps with all the other things that we talked about as you're going through that job search. Red, I'm going to start with you on this one. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean this is critical, right? You still have to perform your current job, right? And hopefully you love most of it, right? If not all of it. If you're looking for another job, obviously there's a part of it maybe that you're looking to improve. But keep in mind also that the people that you're working with, or your supervisor, or someone like this, may be your reference that
Right.
you're using, right? Maybe not now, but maybe down the line when you switch industries or something. But then you go back to that industry, and they're like, "We want to talk to the person that was your boss when you were in education." If you burn that bridge or started having a bad attitude or anything like that, it's going to be really tough, right? Because um, a bad rep from someone can really just destroy your potential to get a position, regardless of if you're the best. So I think this is really important to continue to do your best work, even if you're not entirely satisfied with it.
There's an old saying that says, be careful the toes you step on today. They could be attached to the ass you have to kiss tomorrow, right? So just keep that in mind as you're going through this. Before we wrap it up, any other thoughts? Anybody wants to jump in? And let me just say this too. I know Jeremy and I are probably taking the lion's share of the conversation on this one. And that's only because we've been recently experiencing it. It's not that we don't want to hear from Rhett or, have Mark jumping in, but Jeremy and I have literally been living this. So I don't want it to feel like we're marginalizing, our other folks on the call. So just wanted to throw that out there. Anybody else have anything else to toss out here before we dive towards the summary?
Yeah, I think maybe for a potential future episode, we could talk about interviews. And I think I might have already mentioned this, but we talked about it from setting up from an employer side on, how many stages should you have? What are you looking for in each stage? How do you get the most from the employee? But we may want to have an episode in there where we talk about it from the employee side, as far as, okay, here are the general pieces to an interview, right? They're going to be looking at your personality. They're going to be looking at how you answer questions. One big thing that I think a lot of people could work on, that especially becomes more important as you move up, is what questions are you asking them? Because if you come in and you ask a stellar question, it might prove to that manager or that director or that CEO that, oh, this person asked similar questions to me. They're thinking in the right direction, right? And so your how do you answer questions can be just as important, to what questions are you asking? And I personally, it's one of my big things that I always look for a question. Again, I know it's hard to come up with them, but if you don't have any questions at the end of an interview,
That's a death knell for me. You don't ask me any
right.
questions. It doesn't matter how great the interview went, you're out, as far as I'm concerned. But that does sound like a great topic for an episode. I
Right.
think
Yeah.
we better put that on the list.
Yeah, I'm gonna go put it there. All right. Anyways, to the others.
Jeremy, Mark, any other thoughts?
The only thing I would add is don't be afraid to have an uncomfortable conversation with your manager before you even begin the process. Make sure that you've exhausted the possibilities, because if you haven't said anything, there might have been something that maybe could have been done, or a different opportunity. And again, we probably all have examples, but there was a person that was going to leave to go to grad school, and our divisional president was like, okay, what is it you want to do here? Because I can create something for you to give you what you're looking for, instead of just outright quitting and then going in debt by $75,000, $80,000 or $100,000, from that perspective. So again, I would challenge people that, if you've exhausted that possibility where you've talked to folks, even in a skip level, then that's great. Then you need to, look for that next great adventure. But if you haven't had those conversations with your direct manager and other, a skip level leader above them, then maybe you're jumping the gun on it.
Great point. Jay?
Yeah, that one hit home, Mark. I had I had an employee leave. The last company I was at, I had an employee, a team member leave, maybe 3 or 4 months after I started. Liked him. Really hard worker, solid guy, good personality. Loved having him on our team calls. Um, and just up and left. One of the very few times I've had that happen. We try to be super transparent, and we want to have those conversations. Hey, if we can't help you here, we'll help you somewhere. We'll help you find something somewhere else. And this one was a surprise for me, and I found out after the fact that before I started, he was promised a key account. And then I started, and he didn't get that key account. And there were a number of reasons why I didn't give it to him. But in fairness, I had no idea the company had promised him this key account. He didn't tell me. The person I replaced wasn't there to tell me. People above me didn't tell me. And that was something that could have been easily rectified, right? Whatever concerns I had around bandwidth or capacity, we could have tackled and dealt with. That was such a blow to him that he didn't feel like there was opportunity there in the company. And really, that was something that could have been turned on a dime. And I know it's hard. You get a new manager that's starting out, right? You may not have that super tight comfort level and trust built yet. But Mark, I love that. Unless you're in a toxic environment, is there any reason why you can't share with your boss, hey, this is what I'd like to be doing?
Right.
How can I get there? And maybe it's not today, but can you help me get there in 4 months, 6 months? And if not, can you help me look?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So Red, add that to our list for future podcasts, please.
Right.
Well, I'm at it.
Right.
All right, I'll add it to the list.
As long as you're online.
And before we jump into our summary, I think there was a throwback to one of our episodes you wanted to touch on too, didn't you, Jeremy?
Oh gosh, I was trying to skip that for brevity. No, I was going to say the number 4. If you're currently in a job, remember going back to the imposter syndrome podcast. Keep track of your wins. Keep track of your accomplishments. Because if you find yourself in a situation where you need to look, again, maybe you're going after that manager gig and there just isn't one available, so you're having to look outside. You're not having to rebuild that resume or those 12 or 24 resumes from scratch, right?
That's right.
You've kept that journal. You know what your wins were. You know what your numbers were. And I think if you can keep that running, even if you're perfectly happy in your current role, it's going to give you a leg up at some point.
See, there's so much goodness in all of our podcasts. They all tie together. You can learn something from each of them. Go back and listen to some of these episodes. But kind of wrapping this one up, let's kind of summarize the top 6 things to do while you're between roles. Number 1 was structure your day. Number 2 was network actively. Number 3 was limit your job search negativity. 4 was practice gratitude and focus on self-improvement. 5 was reframe your thinking. And 6 was don't be afraid to take a lower skill job while you're looking. And then the top 3 things to do while you are in a job and looking for a new job is make sure you're scheduling strategic job search time. Easy for me to say. Practice interview techniques discreetly and maintain a positive outlook on your current job. This was a great episode to me. I feel like every week they're a great episode, but I love these conversations. As always, I want to thank the panel. I want to thank everyone for being honest and transparent and vulnerable as we go through this. But for everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Generational Exchange. We hope the conversation between these generations sparks some new ideas and help you see the business world from a fresh perspective. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful discussions across the generations. And if you have a burning business question or a topic you'd like us to tackle, please leave us a comment or shoot us an email at cmsrconsulting@gmail.com. Until next week, from all of us here at the Generational Exchange, thanks for listening and happy learning.